How many of you remember your first encounter with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Was it the colorful 80s cartoon, the action figures, that weird live-action concert tour? Well, I'm about to blow your minds, because the original Ninja Turtles would make those versions look like Sesame Street. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles we all know and love, those wisecracking, pizza-devouring, sewer-dwelling heroes in half-shells, started out as something completely different. If you grew up with the bright, goofy 1987 cartoon or the action-packed movies, you might be shocked to learn that their origins were darker, weirder, and far more violent than the Saturday morning version most of us remember. It all began in 1984, when two struggling comic book artists, Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, sat around brainstorming ridiculous ideas. As a joke, Eastman sketched a Ninja Turtle, a ridiculous mashup of martial arts and reptiles, and the concept instantly clicked. They self-published their first black and white comic, a gritty, underground parody of Frank Miller's brutal Ronin and the grim tone of 1980s comics like Daredevil. This wasn't the kid-friendly TMNT we'd later come to know. It was raw and shockingly intense. The Turtles didn't just fight their enemies, they killed them. In their very first battle, they decapitated the Shredder. Splinter wasn't just a wise old rat sensei, he was the reincarnated spirit of a man. This was Taxi Driver with Ninja Turtles, not the colorful, toy-friendly heroes that would soon take over the world. But then, in a twist nobody saw coming, kids loved the concept. Not the violence, of course, but the idea of mutant turtles trained in ninjutsu, living in the sewers and fighting evil. Toy companies took notice, and by 1987, the Turtles got a full neon makeover. The cartoon transformed them into pizza-obsessed surfer dudes, turning Shredder into a bumbling villain and the Foot Clan into incompetent henchmen. The show was a massive hit, and suddenly, the Turtles were everywhere. Action figures, lunchboxes, video games, even a live-action movie. The franchise became a billion-dollar phenomenon, but it was a far cry from the dark, indie comic that started it all. Decades later, the Turtles have come full circle. The Last Ronin, a 2020 comic, brought them back to their roots, dystopian, violent, and emotionally heavy. The story follows the last surviving turtle in a ruined future, delivering the kind of brutal, R-rated action that Eastman and Laird originally envisioned. Now Hollywood is turning it into a movie, proving that these heroes can be anything, goofy, dark, or both. So, which version do you prefer? The gritty underground comic that started it all? The radical kid-friendly cartoon that made them legends? Or this new era where they can swing between both extremes? One thing's for sure, after nearly 40 years, the Ninja Turtles are still kicking shell. Cowabunga indeed. The origins of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, as we know them today, are far removed from their gritty, underground comic book roots. And to truly understand how they became a global phenomenon, we need to rewind to the early days of Mirage Studios, when two struggling artists named Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird were just messing around with a ridiculous idea that would change pop culture forever. This wasn't some corporate-backed, focus-grouped franchise launch. It was a passion project, a love letter to the comics and movies that inspired them, created on a shoestring budget, with no expectations of becoming a worldwide sensation. The very first issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was printed in 1984, with only 3,000 copies, funded by a humble tax refund and a shared dream between Eastman and Laird. They weren't thinking about action figures or Saturday morning cartoons. They were just two comic book fans paying homage to the stories they loved. The influences were worn proudly on their sleeves. Frank Miller's Ronin provided the dark, dystopian tone. Daredevil, particularly the Elektra saga, inspired the idea of ninjas operating in the shadows of New York City, and classic 70s kung fu films shaped the brutal, fast-paced fight choreography. This wasn't just a comic, it was a melting pot of Eastman and Laird's favorite things, blended into something wholly unique, yet instantly familiar to fans of the era's edgier comics. And edgy is putting it lightly. The early Mirage comics were violent in a way that would shock modern readers who only know the Turtles from their kid-friendly iterations. This wasn't sanitized, cartoonish action. It was raw and often disturbing. In issue number 2, Raphael doesn't just disarm a Foot Clan ninja, he impales him through the chest with his sai, leaving no ambiguity about the lethality of these heroes. There's a haunting sequence where Splinter, still a far cry from the gentle mentor of later adaptations, meditates over the bones of his deceased human master, Hamato Yoshi, reinforcing the tragic, almost horror-like undertones of the story. The Turtles weren't just crime fighters. They were survivors in a brutal world, and their battles had real stakes. Yet, against all odds, kids were drawn to this dark, strange comic. Maybe it was the inherent coolness of ninjas, or the bizarre yet irresistible premise of mutated turtles trained in martial arts. Maybe it was the rebellious, underground energy that made it feel like forbidden fruit. Whatever the reason, by 1985, the comic was selling out in shops, and Eastman and Laird found themselves with an unexpected hit on their hands. The indie comic scene had embraced them, but the real turning point came when corporate America took notice, specifically Playmates Toys. The toy company saw massive potential in the Turtles, but with one major caveat: the comics were way too violent for a children's toy line. If they were going to market these characters to kids, they needed a serious overhaul. Thus began the great TMNT sanitization, or depending on who you ask, the great TMNT reinvention. The black and white grittiness gave way to bright, bold colors. Partially so, each turtle could be easily distinguished on toy shelves. The Foot Clan went from deadly assassins to comically inept goons who existed solely to be knocked around. And perhaps most famously, the Turtles developed an insatiable love for pizza, a trait that wasn't present in the original comics, but became a defining characteristic in the cartoon. This shift wasn't just about making the Turtles palatable for kids, it was about making them marketable, and marketable they were. The 1987 cartoon, with its catchy theme song and goofy humor, turned TMNT into a cultural tsunami. Action figures flew off shelves, the animated series dominated TV ratings, and suddenly Eastman and Laird's weird little comic was a billion-dollar empire. It was a far cry from the indie comic that started it all, but it proved just how versatile these characters could be. Looking back, the evolution of the Turtles is a fascinating study in how underground art can be repackaged for mass appeal without losing its soul. The early Mirage comics remain a cult favorite for fans who prefer their turtles dark and dangerous, while the cartoon and toy line introduced them to an entire generation in a way that felt fun and accessible. Decades later, the franchise continues to swing between these extremes, from the brutal Last Ronin storyline to the kid-friendly rise of the TMNT series, proving that these heroes in a half-shell can thrive in any incarnation. Before we continue, if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? A personalized invitation from Splinter himself? Help us hit 1 million subs so I can do the next video dressed as Casey Jones. I'll bring the hockey pads. Smash that like button harder than Raphael smashes Foot Clan heads. And comment below, which turtle is your favorite? Leonardo the leader? Michelangelo the party dude? Donatello the tech nerd? Or Raphael the, well, Raphael? Now, back to how these radical reptiles became sellouts. I mean, global icons. When the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon premiered in 1987, it didn't just soften the edges of Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird's gritty indie comic. It completely re-engineered the franchise's DNA, transforming it from a violent, underground cult favorite into a neon-soaked, toy-selling, kid-friendly phenomenon. The changes weren't just cosmetic. They were foundational, dictated by strict corporate mandates, creative compromises, and a surprising amount of hidden depth beneath all the pizza jokes and goofy villains. The corporate playbook, How Toys Shaped the Story. Showrunner David Wise, the architect of the series, later revealed that the cartoon operated under two non-negotiable rules handed down by the higher-ups. Every episode needed a toy-friendly vehicle or gadget, hence the endless parade of turtle blimps, turtle copters, and shell cycles. No real consequences. Villains always escaped, no one got seriously hurt, and the status quo had to reset by episode's end. These rules weren't arbitrary. They were calculated to sell action figures. Playmates Toys, which had invested heavily in the TMNT license, needed the cartoon to function as a 22-minute commercial for their products. The result was a world where the Turtles' arsenal grew more absurd by the week. Who could forget the Turtle Sub or the Party Wagon? And where Shredder and Krang's schemes were foiled in ways that left them unharmed but humiliated. Ready to return next week for another round of toy-friendly mayhem. The tonal shift was most glaring in the treatment of the franchise's antagonists. In the Mirage comics, the Shredder was a legitimate threat, a ruthless crime lord who commanded fear and respect. His first appearance ended with him being decapitated by the Turtles. But in the cartoon, he became a bumbling, over-the-top buffoon, constantly outwitted by teenagers, and prone to melodramatic meltdowns. His voice, courtesy of James Avery, later famous as Uncle Phil on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, oscillated between comical rage and whiny frustration, making him more of a sitcom antagonist than a genuine menace. Then there was Krang, the brain-like alien warlord from Dimension X. His ridiculous android body, which looked like a walking, talking meatball with arms, wasn't just a creative choice, it was a network mandate. CBS had strict rules about depicting mutants. Fearing they'd be too scary for kids, the solution? Make Krang an alien trapped in a robot suit, which somehow made him even weirder and more memorable. Even the Turtles' most iconic exclamation, "Cowabunga," was a happy accident. Voice actor Townsend Coleman, Michelangelo, ad-libbed it during recording, borrowing the term from 1950s surf culture. The producers loved it, and it became a cornerstone of Mikey's personality, and eventually, the entire franchise. It was the perfect encapsulation of the cartoon's vibe, carefree, irreverent, and endlessly quotable. For all its goofiness, the 1987 cartoon occasionally snuck in moments of genuine depth, often in episodes that slipped past the censors. Writers like Michael Reeves and David Wise found clever ways to tackle heavy topics under the radar. Shredder Splits, Season 3, a shockingly nuanced allegory for divorce, with Shredder and Krang's partnership dissolving in a petty, emotionally charged feud. Kids might have missed the subtext, but parents certainly didn't. My Brother's Keeper, Season 5, featured a disabled war veteran struggling with self-worth, offering one of the era's rare examples of disability representation in kids' media. The Unusual Suspects, Season 7, tackled peer pressure as Michelangelo falls in with a bad crowd, a storyline that felt ripped from an after-school special, but with mutant turtles. These episodes were exceptions, not the rule, but they proved that even a show designed to sell toys could occasionally say something meaningful. The cultural impact of the cartoon was staggering. By 1990, just 3 years after its debut, TMNT toys were generating $1 billion annually, per Forbes, making it one of the most lucrative toy lines in history. The cartoon reached 20 million viewers per episode, dominating Saturday morning ratings. The Turtles became so ubiquitous that they scored a float in the 1990 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, a surreal milestone for a property that began with a self-published comic featuring decapitations. Looking back, the 1987 cartoon's success was a double-edged sword. Purists mourned the loss of the Turtles' edge, but there's no denying its cultural staying power. It introduced the characters to millions of kids who'd never pick up a Mirage comic, cementing their place in pop culture history. And in a twist of irony, the very corporate mandates that sanitized the Turtles also ensured their survival. Without that toy-driven cartoon, TMNT might have remained a niche cult favorite instead of the multi-generational juggernaut it is today. So the next time you hear Turtle Power or see a rerun of Shredder flailing in defeat, remember, this version of the Turtles wasn't just a fluke. It was a meticulously engineered phenomenon, one that proved even the grittiest concepts could become kid-friendly icons. With the right blend of creativity, compromise, and a whole lot of pizza. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise has always been defined by its ability to reinvent itself, but nothing prepared fans for the seismic impact of The Last Ronin. Released in 2020, this landmark comic book storyline didn't just push boundaries, it obliterated them, delivering a shockingly mature take on the beloved heroes that harkened back to their darkest origins while carving out an entirely new legacy. From its opening pages, The Last Ronin made it clear this wasn't the TMNT of Saturday morning cartoons or blockbuster films. In a devastating prologue, 3 of the 4 turtles, Leonardo, Donatello, and Raphael, are brutally killed in battle, leaving only Michelangelo as the lone survivor in a dystopian future where the Foot Clan rules New York with an iron fist. This wasn't just a bold narrative choice. It was a declaration that the series was returning to the uncompromising vision of Eastman and Laird's original 1984 comic. The Michelangelo we meet here is a far cry from the party-loving surfer dude of past adaptations. He's a grizzled, middle-aged warrior, hardened by loss and fueled by vengeance, carrying the weight of his brother's legacy on his shell. Visually, the creative team, including original co-creator Kevin Eastman, paid deliberate homage to the Turtles' black and white beginnings. Heavy shadows cloaked the ruined cityscapes, evoking the inky, high-contrast style of the Mirage comics. Clever readers even spotted recreations of iconic poses from the first issue, now rendered with decades of artistic refinement, but the same raw energy. The violence, too, was a callback to those early days, bone-crunching, visceral, and unflinching, with Michelangelo dispatching enemies in ways that would have been unthinkable in the kid-friendly iterations. Now, The Last Ronin is poised to make history again as Paramount develops it into a live-action film. Industry scoops from Variety suggest this won't be just another TMNT TMNT movie. It's rumored to be the franchise's first R-rated theatrical release, with a tone comparable to The Dark Knight's gritty realism. Early reports indicate a hybrid approach combining practical turtle suits with CGI enhancements, potentially creating the most lifelike versions of the characters ever put to screen. If these rumors hold, we could be looking at the most violent, emotionally charged TMNT story ever adapted, a full-circle moment for a property that began as a indie comic nearly 40 years prior. What makes The Last Ronin so compelling is how it bridges generations. It satisfies longtime fans who craved a return to the Turtles' edgy roots, while proving these characters can carry profound, adult-oriented storytelling. Whether the film adaptation lives up to the comic's legacy remains to be seen, but one thing's certain: after decades of iterations, the Turtles have never felt more dangerous or more alive. So, what's next for the Turtles? More kid-friendly reboots, or a full embrace of their dark roots? Let me know in the comments. Me personally, I think it will go in the direction of the more adult theme. Most of us that grew up on the Turtles are of the older age now. We are hopefully their target audience. Subscribe for more deep dives. Next up, we're exposing how Pizza Hut saved the 1990 movie. And remember, Shellheads, whether dark or silly, turtle power never dies.